of many musicals that he wrote, composed, and directed shook the walls of the BC Pavilion. That's nothing new for him. He's been shaking walls and attracting attention for a long time now. In the process, he's turned himself into the same kind of national figure he enjoys celebrating, like Billy Bishop, protagonist of the musical Gray wrote when he was just 30 and starred in internationally with his friend Eric Peterson.
Cheers, Ping!
Gray is 40 now.
Another time.
Please play my song.
Oh, well said.
He and the lady in his life, Beverly, live in a comfortable house in Vancouver. They have 2 kids, 2 cars, 1 piano. Steady exercise has cut 15 pounds from his stocky frame, and steady success has cut into his shyness.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Gray.
His musicals have sprung from his passion for all things Canadian, a popular culture that ranges from truckers to rock and roll. And the same passions have raised sparks on the talk show circuit.
I mean, the provincial ministers, give us all a break. It would be awfully nice if we had a few provincial culture ministers that actually had an interest in culture. Right now, it's mostly like being the honorary mayor, right?
Gray and the politicians, natural allies and natural opponents.
See, the issue isn't money. The issue is culture.
I agree with you.
And
that's why we should stop
and
discussing
the world is being divided now into two groups, all right, one under the cultural domination of the Soviet Union and one under the cultural domination of the United States. And it is expensive for a country next door to a superpower to have its own culture.
Hi. Hello, what are your citizenships?
Canadian.
Where are you off to this afternoon?
Seattle.
For what purpose?
Just for a couple of days, going to see a show.
The show is in fact his own, 18 Wheels, his trucker's musical. Gray wrote it 12 years ago, but his work already showed his stamp. A solid rhythmic score and, not far below the surface, a statement, in this case about the way Americans dominate our culture. Now, Gray's been asked to make his statement on the villain's home turf. He's ready and full of ginger. Trouble is, the Americans don't always get the point.
Describe for me what 18 Wheels is about. Has it become a Canadian phenomenon now? What's the popularity in Canada?
Well, it had about 25 productions in Canada, which is the equivalent of 250 in the United States. Just was done and done. And
does that mean every Canadian counts for 10 Americans? Is that what you're?
Yeah, basically. We work on a 1 to 10 kind of ratio with just about everything. Yeah. If we have 1 car, if we were American, we'd have 10.
Mm-hmm. Gray describes his musical as a combination of Jacques Brel and Waylon Jennings, a country western opera about the life, the loves, and the heartaches of truckers everywhere.
And I'll be so damn glad to be home. I miss you so bad. You really love me, really love me, really love me, really love me your way.
Yes, it's got one of my favorite lines, which is, someone's got to haul the parts that ain't so finger-licking good.
The smell, it ain't nothing like Kentucky fried, where the sun does nasty things to a chicken that has died. It's Canadian balance of trade. The colonel gets the money, I get chicken guts, he cares.
If we look at it as a kind of metaphor for Canadian-American trade, the colonel gets the money, he gets chicken guts decayed. You see,
I see. Kind of I see. So it's like sort of like the breasts and the wings go to the United States and the entrails go to Canada.
That's right. Yeah, the beaks and the.
Oh, come on.
Hauling chicken guts in the hot August sun.
18 Wheels is a success in Seattle, but curiously, Gray himself is now dissatisfied with it.
Well, 18 Wheels, I don't think is as good a show as the others.
Right.
It's got a lot of stereotypes in it, and I'm not satisfied with that anymore. Right after that, I moved to Real People, and I was much better off.
He was, too. First with Billy Bishop, World War I flying ace, and certainly real.
Flying Canadian, machine gun in my hand. First ton to seize, the first ton to die.
What attracted you to that story in the first place? You weren't looking for a framework to write about some colonial idea.
No, it was a character. I mean, he was doing something that was entirely kind of foreign to what I normally expect of the Canadians. And in his writing, he was totally without any remorse whatsoever. And I was curious about what state of mind brought that about.
If I get a clear shot at a guy, he's dead. You ever hear a roast pig? Well, that's when you bounce a machine, it kind of just bursts into flames. I don't want some bloodthirst or anything like that, but when that happens, it's very satisfying.
Does Billy Bishop, the play, glorify war?
No, that's an American concept, that you're either for it or against it. To say you're against war is like saying you're against cancer. You know, it doesn't say a whole lot, does it? No, it's about colonialism.
The play is about colonialism?
Yes, it's about doing very well, fighting a war for another country.
Oh, Canada, sing a song for me. Sing one for your lonely son, so far across the sea.
Peterson and Gray toured in Billy Bishop for 4 years, taking it along the way to Broadway, Los Angeles, and London's West End.
Now, Billy Bishop's a big hit in New Zealand right now. The television version's a big hit in Germany. It's in 4 languages. It's been done in 45 theaters in the United States. It's been done in most English-speaking countries. And I never once for 1 second, when I was writing that, thought that it would go beyond Canada. Not for 1 second.
You're more than a writer. You're kind of a performing bear, too.
Yeah, I do an act.
Yeah. And the people for whom you do that may not buy it enough until you can come back with some international certificate.
Well, Billy Bishop really helped. That was the big one, you see.
Because Billy Bishop did well abroad, in New York and London.
Yes.
Then now you're more important to me if I live in Saskatchewan than if Billy Bishop...
Well, you hear about me. Once the announcement came out that Mike Nichols was doing Billy Bishop on Broadway, that made every newspaper, every magazine, everything in Canada. And suddenly, it didn't take us a week and a half for the word to get around. Suddenly, the word was already around, and people were packing it out for the first day. And after we went to Broadway, it got even better, because we could tour anywhere, and we could sell at the Royal Alex, for God's sake. So, I mean, I owe the Americans a lot. They really helped me to communicate with my fellow Canadians.
That's awful, isn't it?
Isn't that nice of them?
When we come back, local boy makes good in Pictou County, Nova Scotia.
To see your world.
Don't you know it's just a memory? Got no particular reality. Oh, foggy memory. It was so long ago.
Long before the rest of Canada had begun to hear about John Gray, the people of his hometown knew him, if not by name, then as a central figure in one of their most distinctive institutions. Gray grew up in Truro, Nova Scotia, population 13,000, home of some well-known and prosperous industries. He was a member of the town's best-known rock and roll band, and the background that led him to music is still part of nearly everything he writes.
In a small town, you meet people that are of all kind of strata, and so you get a lot more texture in a funny way. This is the east end of town, which is more working class than the west end of town. And east end kids and west end kids didn't usually meet or socialize. And the restaurant that they hung out in front of, yawning and scratching their arms, well, there was one of 2, and the first one's coming up was called Murphy's Restaurant. I would not be caught dead in Murphy's Restaurant. You know, I can remember things that I'll draw on, that I don't seem to collect those kinds of place event things in cities as well as I do. I use this town a lot. Coming up here, there's the white spot. Unchanged since 1956, as is its owner, Benny Dyson. I see Benny's got the Christmas decorations up.
Also unchanged is the house John Gray grew up in, with his 2 brothers, both now musicians, and his sister. Grays have lived in this part of Nova Scotia for nearly 200 years. The first came from Scotland, of course, and his parents are still here.
We let you in the back door because you're a guest. If you were just a peddler,
I'd have to go in the front door.
You'd have to go in the front door.
Right.
That's right.
Oh, John.
How are you?
John's mother was a high school teacher.
I'd like you to meet Peter Zoski.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
That's great.
His father, an insurance company administrator.
That's right. I'm glad to meet you.
And still living here is John's 102-year-old granny. All 4 Gray kids learned to play music, and when John was a teenager, he joined the Truro Concert Band with his father, Howard.
We had a Latvian professor of music who moved next door after the Second War, Professor Barino. And he was a very fine teacher, and he influenced all of our family musically.
John was about 12 when he started to get bored with music lessons, and we weren't ambitious for him to compete so much as just to enjoy the piano again. So he taught him syncopated rhythm, and from then on he just played everything he could hear.
What he heard was rock and roll, as played by a local group called the Lincolns. He joined them as their keyboard player. That's him on the left, and his life was never the same.
I played for quite some time for no money, but then eventually it came to the crux, and they said that I could get paid if I would buy Frank Sparfi's organ.
And so he bought it.
A few short steps to romance, Peter. This is the Legion Hall, where we played every Friday night. 700 people, $7.50, and at $1 a head, and we got 60%.
That's a fair amount of money.
For an 18-year-old in 1964, it was. Now, I joined the Lincolns when I was about 18, and they'd been already together for about 4 years. They were an offshoot of a band called the Valiants, another band called the Corvettes, and another, a lot of cars here.
No, but no, you don't have the BMWs?
No,
All big
like
American
big
cars.
American cars, yeah.
Big cars, big crowds. The Lincolns filled halls across the Maritimes through the early 60s. They were
I
stars.
had brought my big-time act in here from Halifax or,
That's right.
or somewhere. Nothing.
No.
You guys were the big news.
That's right. The Lincolns were it, yeah. Because we were not only the best band around, we were also the coolest. We were kind of antisocial, you know. We were kind of risque.
You were beaten up?
Yeah, after a dance in Stellarton, a guy named Louis Irving, he cornered me and beat the hell out of me. And I'll get even too.
When?
It'll take me many. If I see him,
Louis Irving is watching right now.
Yes, Louis.
Look,
Louis. If we are in adjacent wheelchairs someday, and you see a guy kind of go, well, that isn't going to be me, okay? Just keep it in mind.
John's experiences with the Lincolns inspired his third musical, Rock and Roll, in which he cast as the lead singer of the group he called the Monarchs, the lead singer of the Lincolns, Frank McKay. After touring the country twice to packed houses, Gray adapted Rock and Roll for television, renaming it The King of Friday Night. The movie was shot in, where else? Truro.
Well, I think the band is going astray. You want to elaborate? Yeah, okay. We're turning into a bunch of animals. In the last 6 months, the name of the Monarchs has gone right down the toilet. There's parents that won't let their kids come to our dances because they come home drunked up, beat up, or knocked up, or all three.
Pretty gross, Chink.
That ain't gross. That's showmanship.
Get yourself a booking in the Legion Hall.
The movie also used the same Legion Hall in Truro that the Lincolns played in on Friday nights.
Maybe you could show me where you played. Where
Sure.
You played from.
Not only where we played, where we practiced. We usually practiced.
Practiced here too?
Oh yeah, sure. Until they kicked us out. They wouldn't let us practice here after a while. I forget why. And we ended up one of Roddy Norrie's barns or something. I don't know what it was.
So where would that be?
Unknown to John, we'd lined up most of the ex-Lincolns backstage. The last time they'd met was in 1978 when the band held a reunion. It was the success of that reunion that gave Gray the storyline for his play, Rock and Roll.
Now, John Gray maintains that when he came to apply to be, what'd you call it, the organist or the keyboard player? What would you call it?
Yeah,
Keyboard player, right? What were the real criteria? What were you looking for?
We hired him to play the organ because we needed somebody to buy the organ so that Frank could give it up and get his money out of the organ.
Because Frank, he had to have enough money, didn't he?
He had to have enough money to buy the organ.
But being one of the Lincolns required more than musical skills.
I remember you turning to me in the back of the car, passing me a bottle of 555 sherry or nine. Remember that one with the numbers on it, right?
999.
Oh, yeah. And I remember you turning to me, handing this over and going, "We're going to ruin you, Gray."
Chink hands me the bottle, and I get one whiff of that old winette, and I just get my head over my side of the car when away we go. I don't know if you've ever puked out of a car doing 110 miles an hour, but I'll tell you something. It won't stay outside the car. It whips right back in all over us.
When they were into their teens, we just had to trust them. If there's nothing you can do about something, you might as well let it happen or not.
My grandson likes everything. Roll and rock and rock and roll. Rock and roll, I never got into it yet, and I don't like it.
How did it end for you? Why did you ever leave that life?
I got really bored because, I mean, we played Land of a Thousand Dances. It was at least 3 times every Friday night for 4 years. Now, you can get tired of Land of a Thousand Dances. It just becomes tiresome. You get bored.
One day he said, "Mom, I don't know what I would do if I had not learned to play the piano." He said, "I play it when I'm mad and when I play it when I'm glad about something." And it apparently was a very important outlet for his emotions during those years.
When we come back, rock and roll playwright meets old-time fiddle phenom.
Got my dancing boots on, got my Sunday best.
Don Messer and his Islanders. At first glance, an unlikely subject for a man who played rock and roll and wrote his first musical about truckers. To John Gray, though, the taciturn fiddler from Prince Edward Island was a natural subject, and his stage tribute to Messer, starring Frank McKay as Charlie Chamberlain, was an instant hit when it opened in Halifax in 1985. Since then, it's carried on across the country, and it's still on tour.
How did you get plugged into the Don Messer idea? Don Messer, the show, the phenomenon, the cancellation by this wonderful corporation.
Yeah. So it wasn't done by, now, it wasn't done by the corporation. It was done by the people in the corporation.
Yeah, right.
Okay, there's a big difference here.
But all of that, I mean, everything that Don Messer stood for and everything that the cancellation of Don Messer has meant.
Yes.
So fits where you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Popularity in and of itself is not as important as how that popularity reflects on the, shall we say, the cosmetic ambitions of the people in charge. And to a big crown corporation like the CBC, well, it's bound to contain a lot of what was that, boys?
But what about coming out of the tube? Did you?
Oh yeah, we used to watch it, but I didn't like it. I loathed it. It represented everything that I rejected. You know, I mean, the way because that's where I found my handle, right? I was trying to find out where we rejected ourselves, how we reject ourselves, where we get this notion of saying this is so Canadian as a pejorative term, or as though we're talking with somebody else.
The country is as boring as a plow. Eat some firefight a bear, play a tune, say a prayer. Do come out and take a bow.
He was our most Canadian star because his stardom didn't depend upon having your teeth capped and getting a good agent. His stardom depended upon what he represented. And what he represented was Canada in musical form. In the same way that the fiddler, when he first came over with the Celtic settlers and with the accordion player with the Ukrainian settlers, represented their home country in musical form. And when Don Messer first started in 1929, he was the first radio broadcast that went across this country. And that was when the Dust Bowls happened and the Depression. He was reminding them that they had strengths, that they'd been through hard things before, and they could do it again. And when he went on TV, No radio show ever went to TV very successfully because it wasn't what people had imagined when they were listening to the radio. But Don Messer and his people did because they were real. They weren't putting on any act.
How's that, all right?
And the Canadians responded with a kind of religious loyalty that was just like, people come up to me, not saying kind of, I had a nice show, that I really enjoyed that, but thank you, God bless you. In Saskatoon, a front row of people in wheelchairs were actually trying to stand up to give it a standing ovation. You know? I mean, we're talking about people who really feel something for this guy.
Yeah.
Okay? And then, of course, the crowning irony for him to be canceled flatly in favor of something more youth-oriented.
Why write musical theater out of this instead of writing a letter to the editor?
Because I can evoke it. I can evoke it. I can emotionally explain to people right now who never heard or never listened to Messer or wish that they'd shut him off, right? Yeah. Why he was important and why people felt things for him. I identify with him, you know? I mean, I think that...
You identify with Messer?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Why?
Well, I guess because I don't think that I'm particularly interesting because of my personality, you know? I don't think of myself as, in myself, a particularly interesting person, really. I mean, I spent a whole lot of time, I think the reason I got into the theater was because I wanted to be an interesting person. And I think that's why most people actually get into the business, you know, they think that they'll become interesting people if they do that. And I don't think I am. But I think that I do notice some things that, and I can articulate certain things that I think way deep down are important to a lot of people. And that's where my value is in this place that I live in.
Which is?
Canada.
Next week, we're in Toronto to meet Lucinda Vardy, the piano-playing literary agent who's behind a lot of the bestsellers that have changed Canadian publishing.
Every time you do a deal, there's a buzz. It's not the money, it's the enjoyment of clinching the deal, it's the clinch. And unless you've got the wild look in the eye, unless you really feel that you're just running along the edge of the cliff, you don't want to get too comfortable with your authors or your books. You've got to always be on edge.
Meet Lucinda Vardy on Zosky and Company.
Tonight, for the latest news from home and around the world, join CBC Television for The National. Then stay with us for The Journal, in-depth reporting on today's issues. The chemistry of fires is explained on The Nature of Things, as we study man's fascination with fire, its warmth, and its danger. The Nature of Things, Wednesday.
Another one? What? What do you want to say?
On Venture this week, meet